Hi, seventh grade. This is Miss Lunsford, and I'm here to take you through the last part of this week's lesson. Earlier in the lesson, you learned about colonization and mercantilism. You learned that nations in Europe created colonies in the New World in North and South America, and they adopted an economic system known as mercantilism. In mercantilism, these mother countries were attempting to create a surplus, a trade surplus, by selling more than they bought. And that worked really well when they had colonies because they could demand that the colonies only bought products from their European mother countries. And that enabled European countries to become very rich. You also learned that the main trade exports from the colonies were raw materials, things like sugar and cotton and lumber. These are things that had not been turned into anything yet. When those things were exported to Europe, they were turned into something, they were manufactured. And when you have a manufactured product, like you've turned lumber that you imported into furniture, it increases in value. So when Europeans in the mother country sold those manufactured products back to the colonies, they stood to make a profit because the manufactured goods were more expensive than the raw materials that they bought in order to make them. I mean, think about it. What's going to be more expensive? Buying a bunch of lumber from the Home Depot or a fabulous, ornate um, piece of furniture like a dresser that somebody put some skilled workmanship into? Um, so Europeans were actually making a lot of money from this. But in order to keep the raw materials coming in, they needed an enormous labor force in the colonies to make it happen. And that brings us to a fairly dark time in history, which is the Triangle Trade. Triangle trade was around from about 1500 to 1800. And just like the name suggests, it was a trade circuit that Europeans would go on where they traveled. One leg of their journey was from Europe down to Africa, where they would bring those manufactured goods and sell those manufactured goods on the west coast of Africa. And what they traded for were people. They enslaved Africans from the west coast of Africa by the thousands. And they would take those enslaved Africans on the long journey from the west coast of Africa to the Americas. This was the second leg of the triangle. And this leg of the triangle has a name. It was called the Middle Passage. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the Middle Passage next week. And when Europeans brought these thousands of enslaved Africans to the New World, they would then sell them in exchange for the raw materials that we've been talking about, which they would bring back to Europe on the third leg of triangle trade. This overview that you are looking at on this slide comes from a really reliable source. This database, as you can read, is a collaboration between people from all three of these continents, Europe, Africa, and actually four continents, Europe, Africa, South America, and North America. And it talks about the triangle trade and what happened on each leg of this journey. So take a moment to read that. You can pause my video. Once you've read the triangle trade overview, you are going to be able to go to the next slide where there's a short video about triangle trade. And what I like about this video is it's visual and you can actually see the triangle here, okay? So the Americas to Europe to Africa to the Americas to Europe to Africa. And in this video, they talk about the raw materials coming from the New World. They talk about the manufactured goods from Europe, and they talk about the enslaved Africans in the Middle Passage over to the Americas. So it's a nice overview of triangle trade. From there, the last source that talks about triangle trade is this map, and it's just simply a visual. Now, this one, it's harder to see, but you can still see it. There's a triangle. One, two, three. It's between the old world to Africa to the new world and back. Okay. And if you look closely, and you may have to enlarge this a bit, you can actually see that the trade goods for each leg of this journey are written on those arrows for you. Once you got a good handle on what triangle trade was all about, what we're going to ask you to do is simply answer on this slide, slide 24, some questions about the W's of the triangle trade. And for W's, we're talking about who, what, when, where, why. So you're going to plug in your answers here to show that you've understood the basics of triangle trade. Once you're finished, you are ready to move to this week's exit ticket. This is graded. It is for 10 points. You will click on your teacher's name and it will take you to a Google form. And this week, I'm pleased to report that you only have 10 multiple choice questions to answer. In fact, I think it might even be 8 multiple choice questions to answer. So take a look at that. You're going to submit your Google form, and then don't forget to turn in your entire slideshow when you're finished. Students, this week we have Zoom meetings with your teacher on May 13th for odd day students and May 14th for even day students. I hope you're having a great week, everyone. Talk to you soon.